by Lindsay. How are you doing today, Lindsay?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing really good. I'm excited to jump into this topic with you. I think this is a topic that a lot of people are going to be interested in. We're talking about the changing Microsoft Windows Server and SQL Server licensing ecosystem. Thanks for joining me today, Lindsay. Looking forward to chatting with you.
Yeah, I'm excited for this topic as well. We work with so many clients who always have questions about server licensing, Windows, SQL, and so really excited to take a deeper dive today, run through all the options and, utilizing CSP for some of these license options.
Yeah, absolutely. Microsoft has changed the paradigm, as they didn't just replace open license and some of these legacy licensing options. They completely changed how you transact and interact with licensing. So it's a lot to get through, but I think we can break it down and get into some really good stuff. So let's talk about how we used to get licenses, Lindsay. So, back in the day, 10, 20 years ago, you got licenses from a number of different places. If you're a small business, you probably got your licenses OEM, meaning when you bought your Dell server or your Dell laptop, it came with a little license key. And I remember being an IT guy in the early 2000s, and we'd have drawers full of the little sticker that came out of the box with the laptop or the server. And you just have drawers of Windows XP and Windows 7 licenses that you would just reference, and your phone would be full of snapshots of the little license key on the top of the computer, because every time you reloaded a machine, you had to go find a license key. That's OEM licensing. It came with the server. I don't know if you ever dealt with any of that, Lindsay. I know you were less technical than me, but it was a big part of my early career.
I had less experience with OEM, but you and I have both been in the Microsoft ecosystem for over a decade. And so I could rattle off all the acronyms and the changing ways. I mean, we'd open value, volume licensing, server licensing, of course, is still today available on enterprise agreements or EAs, but we have SPLA. I mean, so many different acronyms out there. And it's really exciting to see this license model transition over to CSP licensing, which is where we see the majority of Microsoft 365 licensing in the Cloud Solution Provider Program today. So am I forgetting any of those other acronyms?
You're missing two letters. SA. What does SA stand for, Lindsay?
Software assurance. Although SA is a benefit as part of those programs and not a licensing model itself. So I'll give myself a B+ on that.
That's fair. I think you got an A-. I think you crushed it. As you said, EAs are still around. They're still available, and they also include software assurance. You can buy open license in some very special circumstances, and it exists out there, but it's definitely being killed off. If you have a corporate open license account, you know that those licenses are no longer in the open license portal, which for those of us who have ever had to deal with trying to figure out which of your corporate open license portals had your licenses and which key to get out of there. And, we activated that on Johnny's email instead of mine. Man, we all have some wounds from that. But open license now all shows up in your Microsoft admin portal. So, they've been consolidating this for a while. SPLA is still available for service providers. There's one more. Was it MPLSA? There's a couple others, but the reality is Microsoft is really moving us into the CSP model. And so CSP is just an acronym that stands for Cloud Service Provider, right? And we've been doing CSP 365 for a while. So Lindsay, explain to us the different models we have for buying licenses through CSP.
Yeah. So what's really nice is clients still have the opportunity to buy perpetual licensing via CSP. So when we mention perpetual, that means it's a one-time upfront purchase, and then you get that license key forever. Now, keep in mind, if you're purchasing Windows Server 2025, you're not getting any upgrade rights. You're getting that 2025 license. You have that perpetually. You own that. It's a one-time charge. Where we're seeing a lot of our customers grift towards is a subscription model. So Microsoft now offers subscription-based licensing. So there are a couple different commitment term lengths. There are 3-year or 1-year terms, and you can
Yep.
pay upfront triennial. The 3-year term can be paid annually. You can do an upfront annual order on the 12-month term, or you can break the 12-month term down into monthly payments. So it allows a lot more flexibility. Without a doubt, you also get a lot more benefits. So I mentioned with perpetual software, you're not getting any upgrade rights.
Right.
Well, with the subscription-based licensing, you are. So we have a lot of clients who will say, "Oh, I really need SA." Software assurance. So when we dive into the reason behind that, we're actually finding that the benefits that come with the CSP subscription-based licensing covers exactly what a client needs that would have come with their SA benefits.
Absolutely. So those subscriptions, the difference between perpetual and the subscription, there are some significant details. Now, a lot of people are like, hey, I'm buying a server. Maybe you're a small business. You want to buy those licenses once and be done here. It's an upfront capital purchase. We can totally facilitate that. But as you said, a lot of our partners really want to go with that subscription. And there are reasons for that. One of them is the upgrade rights, like you talked about. It functions very much like SA. SA's software assurance not really needed. But when you have the perpetual licenses, it's the same idea. It's an ongoing, active, alive subscription. And that matters for things like that we'll get into later, like Azure Hybrid Use Benefit. Perpetual licenses do not activate hybrid use benefit, whereas software assurance and CSP does. So anytime we talk about this, we're also, these licenses apply to the other sorts of things you would have bought in the past through open license. So you can buy SQL Server. So we can license SQL Server the same ways, perpetual, CSP subscription, ongoing, different tiers. We can do the same thing with CALs, server CALs, remote desktop CALs. I think we can even do something similar with just even like Office apps. You can buy a copy of Excel. There's some scenarios where people have a bunch of machines they don't want to put user accounts for 365 on, but they need to use Excel on all of those. We can sell the Microsoft Office licenses in a similar manner. So there's a lot of advantages to buying licenses through this. I think in general, it's a little cleaner. It's a little easier to manage. Licenses show up in your Microsoft 365 admin portal. And so they're centrally located in the place you're already going to for all the rest of your licensing. And for us, it makes it easy because we build them just like we do your Microsoft 365 licenses. It's just another subscription on our bill.
Absolutely.
Well, when we get into this, though, we now get into the age-old challenge. I don't know how often you had to get into this, Lindsay, but I would have loved to have AI back in the day when I was trying to figure out exactly how many cores I needed for the server I just bought, because it's got two 18-core Xeon processors. So that's 36 physical cores, but they're hyper-threaded, so it works at 64 cores. How many cores am I required to buy, Microsoft? Have you ever had to go through that mess, Lindsay?
Reading the licensing guide takes an arm and a leg. But for Windows Server, there needs to be a minimum of 8 cores per processor and 16 cores per server. So you need a minimum of 16 cores per server, but each processor also needs 8 cores. We don't want to confuse physical cores with the hyper cores or the logical processors, though. So we are talking just about the physical cores itself.
Yep. So the majority of physical servers were starting at 16, but if you've got two 18-core processors in there, you're going to have to license 36 cores. So that's something to keep in mind of, and that applies to things like if you're doing various licensing for SQL. There's a per core option with SQL. You've got to navigate that. It has a different minimum, which is 4 cores minimum for SQL. So different variables involved there. I will say the caveat to the minimum number of cores per server is slightly different when we get into Azure and AHub. There's actually an 8-core minimum for Azure VM. It's important to keep in mind. We'll talk about that more in AHub, but there's some caveats. And honestly, I will tell you, the real magic of living in the future is, if you're confused about this, go pull open your Copilot, switch it to Claude mode, and ask it your questions. I've got this, I need to do this, I need to do that. It does a really good job of helping you analyze what you need to license. And we're also quite happy to help you. Our team is well versed on this and can navigate this for all of you. Of course, you've got your standard versus data center. If you're buying servers on-prem, you're gonna want to navigate that. Standard has there's specific rules about how many VMs you're going to run if you're running Hyper-V. So you're buying a physical server, you want to buy server standard. You can really run two servers running workloads on that standard license. So that can be the host and a guest, or two guests if the host is just the hypervisor. So standard gives you a little bit of flexibility on how you want to do that. We did this a lot for small business back in the day, where we'd run maybe a remote desktop server and the domain controller, and then the host was just the hypervisor. But if you want to run more VMs, which is very common, maybe you're running dozens of VMs, then data center starts to make a lot of sense to scale up those licensing opportunities and options, because it allows for as many VMs as you want on the licensed cores you're licensed for.
And what about CALs? So are CALs still needed? What does that look like?
So CALs are interesting, and there's a whole can of worms. There's different kinds of CALs. There's Windows Server CALs. There are remote desktop CALs. There's SharePoint and Exchange CALs. We don't deal with those much anymore, since those mostly went to the cloud. When you're running Windows servers, you do need to do CALs for all the users accessing the server. Now, there's some caveats there, and we'd want to get into a conversation. Some of the licenses, like a Microsoft 365 E3, include those server CALs. So you may not need them if you're running E3. You can license Windows Server. The CALs are usually user or device CALs. So you define how many users or devices are going to access the server. And once you buy them, they apply to all the servers of that OS generation you're running. Remote desktop can be bought in either user or device CALs. We talk through the pros and cons of each, and so you can use those. And then, of course, we have CALs for things like SQL. If you decide you can do SQL in a couple different licensing mode, whether that's a per core or per CAL. There's a couple different ways we can slice that, and we can help you drive into that. And actually, you know quite a bit about that, Lindsay. You seem to understand that better than I do. You want to talk to us a little bit about SQL licensing?
Yes. So much like Windows Server, there are a couple additions. So there is SQL Standard and SQL Enterprise. So they are positioned a little bit differently. You can think of Enterprise as mission critical, whereas SQL Standard is just kind of your standard mid-tier option. There's really, for each of those options, there's two different licensing models. You can license it by, let me make sure I'm getting this right here too, because I always mix them up.
Cores versus CALs.
Cores versus CALs. So you can purchase the server license. So there's a license for SQL Server Enterprise or SQL Server Standard. You can purchase that license and then purchase user CALs. The other option is just licensing per core. And so these are sold in 2 core packs, 8 core packs, 16 core packs. You want to make sure you're hitting the minimum and have enough cores for the SQL Server itself. We always have clients ask us, why would I choose one or the other? Where's the price benefit? I'd say when we're seeing about 25 to 30 users, that server and CAL license model does become slightly more expensive. It does, of course, vary based on the needs of the server itself. But really, when we're looking at the cost of the CALs and SQL Server Standard, the majority of the time clients are coming with us and they only need that minimum. That doesn't apply across the board, but when that minimum amount is only needed and you have a certain amount of users, that 25 user mark is really when we start to see the value in going per core.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because the core license is quite a bit more expensive than the server plus CALs for that. You got 10 users in an office using it, that server plus CALs is probably going to be more cost effective. As soon as you hit that critical mass, that core model is not paying attention to how many users are connecting. It's just it's licensing that server to serve all the clients. So if it's internet facing or web facing and has a lot of users, you're going to go core model. But we can walk you through that. That's something we walk people through all the time. I'd say for me, the enterprise, what you really see on the enterprise side is you get a lot more like encryption, scaling, synchronization. A lot of the more high-end, fancy SQL Server capabilities are in enterprise. Maybe security and compliance features, whereas standard is, like you said, that mid-tier solid. I got to run my line of business app, but we're not, changing the world with this app. It just has to do accounting. Standard is useful for most people for their needs. Which brings us to another topic, which is Azure hybrid use benefit. I've alluded to it a number of different times, but it's a really important topic. So let's talk about hybrid use benefit, because there's a couple important layers to talk about with CSP licensing in Azure. So when you run your servers on-prem, we have to license them, and we can use CSP licenses to license them. And we've been talking about that so far. There's another way to manage it through Azure Arc, which we'll get to in a second. But when you migrate them to Azure or you spin up servers in Azure, you have to also pay for the operating system in Azure. Now, we've done episodes on Azure cost management, and one of the things we talk about a little bit is a big chunk of the cost, 30 to 40% of the cost of running that VM in Azure, is paying for Windows on that VM. And that scales based on the number of cores in that server and the capabilities of that server. And so there can be a significant amount of the cost you're paying in Azure is paying for the server licensing. And it turns out that if you buy your licenses through CSP, you can usually save 20 to 50% on the cost of your VM in Azure. And that's true whether you migrated an on-prem server to the cloud or you built a server in the cloud native. If it's running Windows Server, most likely buying your licenses through a CSP subscription will save you significant amounts of money. We've talked about this in other episodes and dug deeper in that, and we'll touch on it again soon. But it's really important to be aware of that. Now, we talked earlier about there's the two CSP models, perpetual versus subscription. In order to activate the hybrid use benefit, you have to be on a subscription. It has to be an ongoing subscription because that VM is ongoing using Microsoft resources, and so they don't allow perpetual licensing to apply. It's also important to keep that in mind when you migrate from on-premise. Most of the time, people who have older legacy servers, maybe you got some server 2016, server 20, older servers 2019 on-prem. You're like, hey, it's time to move them to the cloud. If you bought those and ran those with maybe OEM licenses or open licenses, those licenses are not transferable to Azure. They don't apply to that Azure usage. So at that time, you can move into Azure and get the benefit of the flexibility and scalability of Azure, but you do need to address licensing, and CSP is generally the most cost-effective way to do it. As I mentioned earlier, Microsoft has an 8-core minimum per server for CSP. And why that matters is in Azure, a lot of times we're running 2 or 4 core VMs because you pay by the core for Azure infrastructure. So we run them a little bit leaner because we're wanting to limit the amount of resource we're using to keep it cost effective. But from a CSP perspective, you got to buy a minimum of 8 cores for every server, including the 2-core servers. But the advantage of that is it's actually really cost effective. It's about $25 to $30 per month for the CSP licensing for 8 cores, which covers generally the majority of your servers. And oftentimes that offsets a $50, $100, $150, $200 a month cost that would be incurred on that VM if you weren't using a hub. So if you're in Azure, you're running Windows servers, please reach out and have us walk you through Azure Hybrid Use Benefit. It's an untapped benefit for many Azure subscriptions.
What's really great as well is in the Azure pricing calculator, which is a beast of its own, if you will. But there is an option to select whether you'll use Azure Hybrid Use Benefit or AHUB, or you'd like the license included in your subscription. So what it doesn't do is combine the CSP license cost and what that looks like with the cost of the Azure subscription. But again, something our team is happy to help with.
Yeah, absolutely. We can apply hybrid use benefit to other features in Azure. That includes SQL Server. So if you're running SQL in Azure, we can do the same. Sell you the licenses through CSP, save you some money on that SQL in Azure. That savings tends to be smaller than we see on Windows Server, but it's still significant at scale and worth evaluating. There's a couple other interesting scenarios that involve CSP licenses. So a newer technology Microsoft released that has had a couple of different names over the years. It used to be called Azure Stack. It is now called Azure Local. Is an on-premise version of Azure. So you can buy certified servers from a number of OEMs, including Lenovo and Dell and HPE and any number of other manufacturers. And they actually load a copy of the Azure code base onto your physical servers that run in your data center or in your server closet. And you're able to manage those servers using the Azure interface. So you can migrate servers on-prem, you can deploy things with code, you can do things like run AVD on-prem, which is a big deal. Doing hybrid on-prem AVD is a huge win that I have been begging for years and is now available. So
Azure, I know you've been playing around with Azure Local. What has been the game-changing moment for you?
It's got to be AVD on-prem. Just that ability, to have remote access, because so often companies have a legacy line of business app they want to run on premise. We love Azure, but especially in the small business space, there's still a lot of businesses that run off of a traditional fat client app that needs a big SQL server and a big application server and a big file share. And things like SQL Server can be expensive to scale for small business in Azure, just because the core is required, the memory required, the licensing. It can be difficult to do that in a cost-effective way for small business. And so a lot of our small businesses go, well, I could spend a lot of money per month on that, or I could pay up front for some healthy hardware, and then I've got a 5-year run rate on that piece of hardware. Well, managing it locally is certainly an option. We've done that for many years. The ability to put Azure Local on there, move those servers into an Azure environment, but have them do backup to Azure, be able to manage them from Azure, do security from Azure, migrate resources and things back and forth is a huge win. And so Azure Local is really an interesting option for people in that space. And then AVD gives you that remote access where, hey, people are working from home now. They still need to get into remote desktop kind of environment. And remote desktop is just not secure anymore. It's a legacy product. You have open ports. It's going to get hit by the threat actors. We recommend not opening those ports. And AVD allows you to do that remote access without any open ports. It's a federated connection through your 365 login. Facilitates a tunnel into your environment. It's very secure. It's protected by MFA. It's logged by your Intra ID. So it's a highly secure way to allow that remote access from anywhere to your on-prem or in data center legacy apps. So Azure Local is very cool. The thing to keep in mind with Azure Local is Microsoft bills for it very much like they do their servers in Azure. They're facilitating those servers for you. So by default, you're paying by the core and by the workload, just like you would in Azure's data center. But if you enable CSP licensing and Azure Hybrid Use benefit on your Azure Local server, those costs drop dramatically, and you get the same savings you get in the cloud by enabling Azure Hybrid Use benefit. So a huge, huge benefit for people who want to run those sorts of resources on-prem.
And speaking of, pay as you go in Azure, walk me through Azure Arc a little bit.
Yeah, Azure Arc is Microsoft's server management layer, and it's really designed to manage resources across any ecosystem you have. You got servers running on Nutanix, you got servers running in VMware or Hyper-V or bare bones on Metal, or you've got them in Azure. Azure Arc extends a whole layer of management across all of those resources. And one of the things that it can do for us is if you have on-prem servers, once in a while we get somebody who calls us and they go, I think we're out of compliance for our licenses. We bought all these servers. I had an engineer. He would build a server every couple of months. I got 42 servers on-prem. I don't know what I'm licensed for. I'm probably not licensed for this. I can't find our open license. We're out of compliance. What do we do? Well, we can do CSP licenses, but the other way you can go is you can put Azure Arc on there. And what Azure Arc enables is for us to do your licensing through the Azure Arc interface, and we can bill through Microsoft those licenses as a consumption model. Sees the size of your server and says, oh, you're running Windows Server Standard, you're on-prem, that's fine. I will bill you for that. And it can be a really great tool to just get yourself in compliance quickly. Hey, I'm paying for my licenses. Azure Arc is confirming that. I've got this great management layer that allows me to do security and other management capabilities from the Azure portal across all my servers in this data center and on that VMware stack and that Nutanix stack and that Hyper-V stack. It's all managed the same. So it really adds a lot of convenience there. Again, we'd want to also sit down with you. And if you're going to go that route, we can talk about where that licensing makes sense and doesn't make sense. In general, doing CSP is still going to be cheaper than doing pay-as-you-go on Azure Arc. Again, Azure Arc is going to be that more expensive server billing that's similar to Azure or Azure Local. And so CSP is a better way to go. There are some arguments that SQL is actually pretty cost effective on Azure Arc. So that's one place where we do see people using it. The other place that Azure Arc is really useful for is there's two other places Azure Arc adds value. One is it allows you to do extended security updates to on-premise servers. So right now, extended security updates are available for Server 2012. Windows servers get about 9 to 11 years worth of security updates from Microsoft. When they hit that 11th year, Microsoft's no longer providing free updates, and you have to pay for updates over the next 3 years. So Server 2012 and 2012 R2 are now in the extended server update window. And so they're 2.5 years into their update window. So if you have 2012 and you need to make sure it's patched, we can help you get there through extended server security updates. And Azure Arc is one of the easiest ways to deploy that to on-prem servers. The other option is to migrate them to Azure. And once they're in Azure, they automatically get extended security updates. And so that's one of the values of doing a lift and shift migration, which we do regularly. But that extended support really makes sure that those servers are patched through the end of that window. That window ends for 2012 and 2012 R2 here in October. And so at that point, they will not be getting patched through anything. So if you're on 2012 and 2012 R2, you got 6 months to really build a plan to drive those servers to a newer OS. But we'll be hitting the new window for 2016 and 2019 coming up soon, where they will move into the extended support and have paid support options coming up in the next year. So
one thing that we're also seeing a lot of specifically to end of support is Windows. So just another call out that Windows 10 ESU can be purchased via CSP licensing.
yes.
I believe that is a one-time perpetual license there, but it's a really easy way to get the benefits of that in a quick and easy manner.
Yeah, it's lets you keep those Windows 10 endpoints patched until you have a plan to upgrade them. It's actually an annual license. You pay for it annually, and the price goes up every year. So it's $60 the first year, $120 the second year, $180 the third year. And with all these extended support windows, you usually have to pay for the years you missed out on. So if you're like, I got to get on extended support, we're about 6 months into the first year of that. So if you wait till December when we're in the second year and you want to upgrade and add that extended support, you're going to pay for the first year and the second year at that time in order to enable those updates. That Windows 10 licensing is generally easiest deployed with Intune. Set a policy in Intune and push those extended support updates to Windows 10. But it's a great way to cover, maybe you've got some legacy or apps that, devices that you just can't replace quickly. Using extended support is a great way to drive security and compliance across those devices. The other thing Azure Arc does well in the server environment is it really facilitates deploying Defender for Server and Defender for Cloud to those servers on-prem and across your ecosystem. Azure Arc does a great job of managing that security infrastructure for the Defender EDR product. So definitely some additional upsides on that Azure Arc product. So Lindsay, I've gone ahead and purchased my CSP licenses. I got this shiny new server from Dell, and I want to get Windows Server installed on it. Where do I get my keys? I need my license keys, Lindsay. Can you help me?
Oh my gosh, it is so easy. So Nathan, are you familiar with the Microsoft admin portal?
I've logged into that a couple times. I think so.
Okay, perfect. On the left-hand side, there's a tab that says billing. And you'll notice if you're ever trying to manage your Microsoft 365 licenses, you'll click on billing and then licenses. Well, fancy enough, there is just another tab that says your products. And that's where you'll see all of your server licensing. So it's not in the same exact section as the Microsoft 365 licensing, but there's an additional tab and you can easily download the keys right there.
Get your downloads, the server operating install links, your keys, and in that keys you can get your activation keys, or if you're using a licensing platform, you can get your keys for that licensing platform. There's various ways to do that, and that's beyond the scope of our conversation here.
We do
There's
have
a couple
questions as well about downloading the keys for CALs. Now, funny enough, you don't download the keys for the CALs, and why is that?
Well, it depends on the CAL. So server CALs and SQL CALs are generally on the honor system. Microsoft has not built the infrastructure to enforce those. And so those CALs can't be downloaded because there's nowhere to load them. There's nowhere to install them. It's on you to maintain compliance for the number of users and the CALs you have. And in the license agreement, you're agreeing to properly license any Microsoft software you're using. So you've committed to make sure that's clean. But it's really on you to make sure that that's dialed in. Where that gets different is there are a number of CALs, including remote desktop CALs, that are actually enforced. There is a licensing manager to install, and you run the licenses in there. So you will find CAL downloads for those. A couple other wrinkles to keep in mind. GCC and GCC High, which are government community cloud licenses for higher security scenarios. Maybe you need FedRAMP, Office 365, or you're handling sensitive data like CUI or ITAR. Maybe you're CMMC compliant. We can help you get into a GCC or GCC High Microsoft 365 tenant. And in those cases, when you buy your CSP licenses, I think the licenses still need to deliver to a commercial tenant. So we can walk you through doing that as far as if you're buying CSP server licensing, that licensing will not appear in a GCC tenant. It will require a commercial tenant to deploy the licenses to. And the same is true for scenarios where maybe you're not running Microsoft software. We do run into customers once in a while that are fully on like Google Apps and Google Workspace and Slack and Zoom, and they don't really use Microsoft 365. It's pretty rare because a lot of people are still licensing desktop apps. But if they don't have a tenant and they want to buy CSP server licenses, we have to build a tenant for them. But it's really, really quick and easy. We get a few details from you. We spin up the tenant. There's nothing enabled on that tenant as far as email or all the features. It's just your CSP licenses. And it's very easy to get you going on that side. The other thing I really like about the CSP licensing is I think it just keeps it a lot cleaner and easier to do, license compliance and auditing. Back in the day, it was a real pain in the butt. Like I said, you're pulling open your drawer. You're hoping you have all the little certificates you got from Microsoft in the mail over the years for your open license and your OEM licenses. Maybe you're logging in the open license portal. Like I said, there's weird things about somebody activated on another technician's open license portal. It didn't share it with you properly. It can become a real nightmare trying to nail down where your licenses are. In the new model where they all just show up on your admin portal, it becomes much easier just to go find your licenses for your tenant. It's all in one place. Your volume license, your CSP licenses are all there. And it makes it really a lot cleaner scenario when you're trying to dial in. Maybe you get audited on licensing. It really helps a lot and makes that conversation go better. If the Microsoft license enforcement team ever calls you, oftentimes we can tell them that, hey, we're managing that client's licenses through CSP, and we can vouch that they're buying what they need. And usually that compliance team will give you some room and give you some space on that audit. Well, I think that about covers it. Lindsay, you've been getting a lot of calls on this. It's a very common thing people are coming to you for. They're trying to figure out how to license their servers. So you're very adept at navigating these scenarios. Kind of wrap this up for us. So what are the advantages and disadvantages of the CSP scenario for licensing those server licenses?
Yeah. Well, this is the model that Microsoft is moving towards. So part of those legacy models where Microsoft is letting go of those legacy chains that were really keeping clients stuck in the dark ages. So this allows a lot more flexibility in not only the purchase method, but the management, like you mentioned as well. And it applies to a variety of different solutions. So again, the hybrid benefit, it applies across Azure and on-prem. You're not missing anything by utilizing CSP licensing. If anything, it's all a gain. So, I mean, I truly cannot think of one reason why a client would not be excited about purchasing via CSP compared to going back in the volume licensing center or anything of that sort.
I agree. I also think that the CSP model tends to be much better than anything you might have gotten in the past, maybe through an EA or an open license with SA. The problem with open license with software assurance or an EA agreement is they tend to be 3-year agreements and there's no flexibility. Whereas with CSP, a lot of our customers just figure out what their license need is. They go, oh, I need 72 cores of Windows Server Standard right now. So we sell them 72 cores. And then they add 2 servers partway through the years and we sell them another 36 cores because they added 2 servers. And then they go, oh, we got rid of those servers and we're back down to needing 65, 64. Great. Well, when your renewal window comes up for those, we'll decrement those down to 64 and you've got 64 licenses covering your scenario. And I think that flexibility to really dial in the number of cores you need for the work environment you're using, it fits much better with the active world we're in, where they had to spin up a server for a project. We needed a short-term, project to run this data governance project we're on. I had to store a bunch of data somewhere, so we spun up 4 extra servers. Great, let's go get you some licenses on a 1-year commit, license that server, and then when we're done, we'll decrement that down. So I think it just provides a lot of more precision and flexibility in how you license things. And as you said, Lindsay, it's kind of the only way to do this these days. There's really hard to buy licenses other ways, and frankly, it's the most cost-effective way in every scenario is generally to buy your licenses through CSP. So that's probably the biggest win for everybody.
And one other topic we did forget to discuss is the downgrade rates, because every so often we see customers who need a certain license type. So walk us through the download tiers and options there.
Yeah, it's a great call out. Thank you for catching that, Lindsay. Common scenario. I see it in 2 different scenarios. Sometimes people are just nervous about new, and I get it. Server 2025 just came out. It's like 6 months old. Hey, I got a production workload. I'm not sure my line of business app will run on 2025. It doesn't show up on the compatibility list, but 2022 is. So they want to run server 2022, and they come in, can I buy server 2022? Well, actually, I can't sell you server 2022 because the licenses are server 2025. But as you said, Lindsay, the license keys and the downloads are downgrade permitted. So you can go ahead and buy your cores and your CALs for that 2025 server and run that 2022 server on your environment, and you're fully in compliance. You'll get keys that activate, and it's fully supported. We also see a lot of this with SQL. Hey, I see SQL 2026 is out, or whatever the number is. I'm not sure what the number is for the most recent version. I can't keep up. But I want to run an older version of SQL Server. Same idea. We can downgrade to an older SQL Server because those things can be a big deal for those line of business apps. They can be very picky, or you can put yourself in a position where the vendor won't support you because you're running an unsupported version of Server or SQL. And so it's important to be able to run the correct version, and it does apply to those servers. And it also applies in a compliance perspective. Hey, I've got some 2012 servers on, 2019 servers. I don't know where the keys are. Great, let's go get you some 2025 licenses. They're valid to activate and validate that you're paying for licensing for those servers. You're in compliance. So it's a real win to have that capability.
And it is just downgrade rights to the 2 previous versions. So for Windows Server 2025, you can downgrade to 2022 and 2019. We're seeing less and less of the 2019, of course, out there, but just note anything older than that, unfortunately, cannot be licensed at that point with the new licensing.
And I think that the trick here is, I might be getting myself in trouble here, but You don't get license keys for older, but I think paying for the licenses still does validate in an audit perspective of, do you have valid licenses for those servers? The older server licenses do count as valid licenses for those. Let's say you got some 2016 servers. I can't get you keys, but I can get you in compliance for those servers. Well, Lindsay, this has been a great conversation. I hope it's helpful to everybody. It's kind of amazing how many little wrinkles we had to talk through, and it might be overwhelming, but I think in the end, it actually is really straightforward. It's a really clean way to license. It's a lot cleaner than the old open license. And how many do I got to buy? And I got to order them, and I got to wait for my little license key thing to flow in. We literally could just figure out how many cores you need. We click a button and you get them 5 minutes later in your Microsoft portal. It's that quick and easy. And I think it's really simplified a lot of complex workflows for IT people. And we're happy to help if anybody reaches out to ask for help. You'll get Lindsay's smiling face on a call. Happy to help you with your licensing needs.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Nathan. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it was awesome. Thanks for taking the time to chat with me, and hopefully this was helpful to everybody. And we look forward to talking to you on our next episode of the Demystifying